Ooh, man, we got a hot one today. A hot take. A fresh take. People might get upset with this one. Maybe no one in my audience, but I know that the subject matter of what I have to say with this is definitely heavily controversial. And that is that Shakespeare is overrated, isn't that good, is not as good as people claim him to be, and I'm going to dig into some of the reasons why I hold this opinion. Now, of course, with everything, these are just my opinions. This is how I feel about Shakespeare, and it does not necessarily apply to how everyone should or does feel about Shakespeare, but it's definitely what I think of Shakespeare. So, why isn't Shakespeare that good? Because clearly he's important, right? You can't go to an American high school or just any school system in America without studying Shakespeare. You can't really study any form of theater, which I study. I'm a theater major at college. And you can't study theater without having to read Shakespeare, learn about the history of Shakespeare. Even as a requirement for a degree in English at my university, you have to take a whole Shakespeare class. You're not required to as a theater major, but in your classes, you're going to be studying some Shakespeare. Almost every year, one of our main stage productions in my theater department at school is a Shakespeare adaptation. He is, I would say, ubiquitous with English writing and theater as a whole. He's a really important fucking dude, often credited as one of the greatest playwrights, if not one of the greatest writers of all time. You know, it's pretty crazy. And you can understand why. He is always credited with having invented hundreds of words and making these stories that hold up as mainstays, as these kind of historical stories that everyone's heard of. Like, everybody knows the tale of Romeo and Juliet. Everybody has heard about the end of Macbeth, right? These are stories that people know about, and it's for a reason. It's that Shakespeare is just so huge and so popular, or at least is so exposed, right? Everybody knows Shakespeare. So clearly he must be good, right? Well, if you study art or talk about art in any subjective way, you understand that just because something is important or influential or is deemed good by lots of people, that doesn't mean that it's always good for everybody. And I feel that way towards Shakespeare. And this is a complaint you'll hear a lot from high school students, people that are forced to study Shakespeare, that don't really have an interest in literature or in plays. And the big thing that a lot of people hate about it, including myself, is the language. Because Shakespeare is written in this sort of Elizabethan era English language, but because Shakespeare was kind of an experimental guy that was doing some newer and weirder stuff, it's an even bigger twist on that language, not towards anything that a modern English-speaking person would be familiar with. It's this very archaic sounding use of the English language that is in poetic form, the famous iambic pentameter. And that, for a lot of high school students and people that aren't familiar with it, is a lot to tackle, right? And I have studied a lot of Shakespeare plays. I don't know how many total. A good chunk, maybe about half or more of his plays. And I've studied the same one several times. I've been doing it since high school, and now that I'm a theater major, I'm just exposed to it a lot more. And so I am more comfortable reading Shakespeare, dissecting the language and understanding it, but that doesn't mean I enjoy doing it. The language does not come off to me as something that really wants me to pay attention to it. And that's not just when I'm reading it, but that's also when I watch adaptations, stage adaptations or film adaptations, where they maintain the script of the original written play. And so I just find it really off-putting, uninviting for someone that speaks modern English and speaks modern English quite a bit, given that I make videos and talk to people as my main hobbies. So, and also a lot of the media I consume is in modern language. Funny enough, being one of the main mediums I consume being in the Japanese language, that I would have this complaint about another language that I don't speak fluently. It's just that there's a certain cadence to the Japanese language. I do enjoy listening to the Japanese language a lot more than this Elizabethan English that makes it a lot more accessible for me to enjoy something like anime over Shakespeare. But also, I just spend a lot more time with anime and with other media in different forms than just Elizabethan literature and plays and Shakespearean literature, which is a big deal, right? And it just makes it so off-putting and uninviting to read that I really don't want to ever have to read or even listen to Shakespeare. It's just off-putting. Now, the next thing is that this is another complaint that when I provide it, the people have a quick argument against. But it's that Shakespeare's plays now are primitive in terms of story writing, and at least story convention and plot structure and character archetypes, because it's been copied so many times, right? Shakespeare being a really influential playwright and establishing all these grounds from which stories are to be built on for the next several hundred years, even to today. So he is the beginning. He's the start of it all. He's really influential for that reason. But what that also means is that more people have had time to work with the foundation that Shakespeare established. So you take a West Side Story or Lion King or even a more modern adaptation of Romeo and Juliet or something like that, you know, where language is revamped or just the setting of the play is altered in such a way, or the language is changed, or it's set somewhere different. It's just a different telling of the same story, and a lot of times they're done better. I prefer West Side Story over Romeo and Juliet. I prefer The Lion King over Hamlet. You know, it is a way that I prefer to consume media. And sure, I might like film more than I like stage productions or reading Shakespeare, which might be ironic as someone that studies theater and pays thousands of dollars to go to school to study it, but I do prefer film over theater in terms of consuming it for entertainment. And I just find that those stories, because they're more, they use a more updated language, they apply to modern sentiments and things that I care about more than these traditional ways, and are done so in a way that is more inviting to a early 20s or college student person. But this is applied since I was in high school. For a teenager, college student age person, these stories are much more appealing, and the way that these stories are told is much more interesting to someone like me than to someone else that might enjoy Shakespeare more than me, because to me, it's just more primitive now. I'd rather see adaptations of Shakespeare as opposed to staying true to it. And that applies for the script. I'm fine with people changing the way it's written and the type of language that people speak. I'm fine with people changing characters and settings. I mean, there's when you're adapting something, there are there are liberties that you're allowed to take, but there's also kind of rules that people tend to follow in terms of following a certain plot structure. I mean, when you get the rights to a play to do a production of it or your own adaptation of it, a lot of the times there comes a contract with that and you're not allowed to break certain things. But Shakespeare, being in the public domain and not something that you need to jump through hoops to be able to get approved and produce yourself, you can do whatever you want with Shakespeare. And so why wouldn't you? Because I've had discussions and debates with people in my theater department about Shakespeare after our last production. And a lot of people were really hurt or offended or just weren't fans of adapting. We adapted Titus Andronicus into kind of its post-apocalyptic setting, but kept the original language, and it made this interesting anachronistic mix of the setting and the language that was hit or miss with a lot of audience members. I personally didn't care for it. I really liked the aesthetic of the show and the setting, but like I said, I'm still not a fan of the language, and I think that mixture didn't work really well. But like I said, that's my own personal opinion towards the matter. So we had discussions about the show, and a lot of people were defending traditional Shakespeare. And what I said, it's like, we have, in doing an adaptation, have the liberties that we can take, particularly for something that's public domain and very open to adaptation, like Shakespeare being this foundation piece. Why would we not take this foundation and run with it, right? And instead of sticking to this thing, this traditional version of the show that everybody's familiar with, why would we do something that people expect to see? Instead, we can go and do something crazy. And sure, we twisted it and made it this post-apocalyptic thing, but the story and the script were still exactly the same. So why on earth wouldn't we just go completely in deep and change the language, change the way it's spoken? I wouldn't say you mess with the story too much, but there's a lot more that you can do with it to make it more interesting than just changing the setting, you know? And sure, if you are the director or the designers for the show, or just the production team in general, you can do whatever you want, right? And if you like that the way it is, that's fine with you. But I personally think that traditional Shakespeare and just anything that stays remotely close to the way Shakespeare was originally written is pretty off-putting, and you really need to do a lot to make it interesting for me, because, to be honest, I'm burnt out of Shakespeare. I'm tired of studying it. I'm tired of reading it. I'm tired of people talking about it and praising it as the greatest writing of all time and the greatest playwright of all time. It's boring and frustrating to read and just not enjoyable. I would much rather just read a play written in the last 5 years. And I'm not just saying that I don't like old plays, because there are plenty of older plays that I like. But I guess I could make the point that I make for Shakespeare with a lot of other antiquated playwrights that don't apply to me, just because a lot of it just seems very archaic, and there's a very traditional mindset in a lot of theater people's minds that holds these older plays to a very high regard. You see the same thing with classic literature, of course. And I there's kind of a backlash, although there's more and more plays and literature being written every day. More people and more people are getting into the game and making great work. It's just that a lot of it isn't getting the attention that I think it deserves because of the insane amount of attention that is provided and given to these classics and more traditional pieces. And I just think that's wrong. I think it hinders creativity. I think it's important to study and respect the classics, the plays that created the foundation, like with your Shakespeare. But I think there's a hyper focus on it to a dangerous degree when it comes to studying theater and praising theater. And if you ask a random person on the street to name one playwright, the playwright that most people are going to know, maybe the only one they'll know, is Shakespeare. And I just think that's just wrong. That's all I got to say. Today was another day, another vlog. I have a couple scripted, more edited videos that I'm planning to get out. Hopefully soon. I need to start grinding out some scripts. These edited videos definitely take a lot more out of me and a lot more time to produce. So I think I might just stick with vlogs for a little while, unless I have a day where I can bust one out, and in the meantime work on pieces of these. So write a script one day and edit it the next, and then hopefully by like the third day or the second day, I can get it out. So I'm going to start kind of doubling up on projects and keeping some being worked on at the same time, so I can hopefully get out a more consistent stream of edited videos. And until then, I will see you tomorrow. Again, if you have anything you'd like to say about this, put it in the comments, hop in my Discord. I'm always around whenever I'm awake. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace out.